CNN Newsroom. I'm Ana Cabrera in New York. Thanks for being here. We began this hour with stunning developments in the national debate on sexual harassment. The tide that started in Hollywood now appears to be sweeping through Capitol Hill. First, Senator Al Franken finally speaking out publicly about the allegations made by two separate women. Here's what Franken told Minnesota Radio just today.
What matters is that I am ashamed of that photo. She is, she didn't have any ability to consent. She had every right to feel violated by that photo. I have apologized to her, and I was very grateful that she accepted my apology.
More of Senator Franken's interview and what he's planning to do next coming up. Meanwhile, a major development concerning another Democrat mired in scandal. Congressman John Conyers stepping down from his role as ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee amid the allegations of sexual harassment and workplace abuse. The 88-year-old denies the allegations and says he will be vindicated. And then there's the all-important Alabama Senate race. President Trump today voicing fresh support for fellow Republican Roy Moore, who has been dogged by sexual misconduct allegations made by numerous women. Our reporters are covering every angle. Ryan Young in Minneapolis, Kaylee Hartung in Atlanta, and Boris Sanchez outside the White House. Let's start in Minnesota and the new comments from Senator Al Franken. After 8 days without speaking publicly, Franken reaching out to his hometown media outlets to talk about the allegations he's facing, what he's done about them, what he will be doing next. To recap, one woman claims Franken sexually harassed her in 2006 before he was in the Senate. But now there's a second woman who says he groped her during a photo op in 2010. That was while he is a senator. CNN's Ryan Young joins me now from the senator's home state of Minnesota. Ryan, tell us what Franken is saying today. What else is he saying?
Anna, he used the words embarrassed and ashamed. That's the first thing that we've heard from him in the last few days. Of course, you talked about that for 8 days. He really didn't say anything. Now he's reaching out to his hometown, not only the paper, the radio, and a television interview that he's going to do later this evening. Of course, we all wanted to hear his words in terms of addressing these allegations. And today and this afternoon, he spoke up.
I'm just going to do my job, and I'm going to go forward. This has been 10 days since this came out. I'm going to go forward. I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to be held accountable, and I'm going to try to be productive in the way I speak about this.
You know, a lot of people talk about the idea of being Minnesota nice and walking around here in the last few hours, just talking to people, getting their initial reactions to these interviews. They wanted to see his on-camera interview. They want to see how he looks when he's talking about what he's addressing in terms of these allegations. Another quote that came from the paper that stood out is, "I don't remember these photographs. This is not something I would intentionally do." So people trying to see the ramifications of what happens next. This interview airs tonight at 10:30. His first sit down with the reporter, a local reporter here. People want to see his face. They want to feel whether or not he's being truthful when he's talking about these allegations and what happens next. He says he's going to report to work on Monday. So, of course, this people watching this, intense scrutiny will continue. Anna?
We haven't heard Franken actually speak for 8 days. Why now?
Yes. Well, that has been a part of the conversation that a lot of people have. Of course, it looks like it's time first to talk to people in this state. So he hit the paper first, then public radio, and then, of course, that television interview. It's all interesting to be timed. Of course, Mondays when he's talking about going back to work. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of conversation just not only about him facing some of these allegations, but in a question that someone asked him, will there be more women stepping forward? He said 2 weeks ago he wouldn't have thought any women would have stepped forward. So now he's not sure if anybody else will come forward. Anna?
All right, Ryan Young in Minneapolis, thank you. Let's turn to Congressman John Conyers announcing hours ago he is stepping down from his important role on the House Judiciary Committee as he faces an Ethics Committee investigation into allegations of sexual harassment and workplace abuse. Let's get right to correspondent Kaylee Hartung in Atlanta. Kaylee, what are you hearing from the congressman?
Well, Congressman Conyers, Anna, continues to deny the allegations against him. He announced in a statement today that he would be stepping down from his position as the ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee, saying, quote, "I deny these allegations, many of which were raised by documents reportedly paid for by a partisan alt-right blogger. I very much look forward to vindicating myself and my family before the House Committee on Ethics." He went on to say, "I have come to believe that my presence as ranking member on the committee would not serve these efforts while the Ethics Committee investigation is pending." And a senior Democratic aide tells CNN that this decision for Conyers to step aside comes after days of Nancy Pelosi talking with Conyers and members of the Congressional Black Caucus behind the scenes of how Conyers could step aside gracefully.
Kaylee, how is House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi responding to all this? Because she was on the talk shows earlier today prior to the announcement making comments, and this all happened after that.
Right, Anna, there was a change in tone from Nancy Pelosi before and after this announcement came from Conyers. Now, following his announcement, she struck a very firm tone as she said in a statement, quote, "Zero tolerance means consequences. I have asked for an ethics investigation, and as that investigation continues, Congressman Conyers has agreed to step aside as ranking member. As a woman and mother of 4 daughters, I particularly take any accusation of sexual harassment very seriously. We are at a watershed moment on this issue, and no matter how great an individual's legacy, it is not a license for harassment. I commend the brave women coming forward." But earlier today, before Conyers stepped aside, Nancy Pelosi nearly defended him. She went so far as to call him an icon. You have to think if that statement and that harsh tone she brought was in reaction to the backlash she felt after making these comments on Meet the Press.
We are strengthened by due process. Just because someone is accused, and was it one accusation? Is it 2? I think there has to be. John Conyers is an icon in our country. He has done a great deal to protect women, Violence Against Women Act, which the right wing is now quoting me as praising him for his work on that, and he did great work on that. But the fact is, as John reviews his case, which he knows, which I don't, I believe he will do. I believe that he will. Excuse me, may I finish my sentence? Sure. That he will do the right thing.
Now that we've learned more about the behind-the-scenes conversations that were happening between Pelosi and Conyers and the Congressional Black Caucus, you have to wonder, Anna, if that helps explain why she continued to say this morning she thought Conyers would do the right thing.
Kaylee Hartung in Atlanta, thank you. President Trump, meanwhile, is making his way back to the White House from his private resort in Florida. CNN's Boris Sanchez is in Washington awaiting the president's arrival. Boris, has the president said anything about all this?
Well, Anna, the president has weighed in on the Senate race in Alabama and Roy Moore. It's been an interesting shift on how the president has gone from seemingly not wanting to talk about the allegations against Roy Moore to now almost stopping short of endorsing him. It's been an interesting shift from initially because you'll recall that the White House was echoing other Republicans when the president put out a statement saying that if these allegations were true, then Roy Moore should step down. Just a few days ago, he was asked about these allegations, and he said that Roy Moore is denying them and left the door open to potentially go to Alabama and campaign for him. This morning, the president dug further in his heels, tweeting this out. He writes, quote, "The last thing we need in Alabama and the U.S. Senate is a Schumer-Pelosi puppet who is weak on crime, weak on the border, bad for our military and our great vets, bad for our Second Amendment, and wants to raise taxes to the sky. Jones would be a disaster." Doug Jones, of course, is the opponent of Roy Moore. And then he further tweeted out this: "I endorsed Luther Strange in the Alabama primary. He shot way up in the polls, but it wasn't enough. Can't let Schumer-Pelosi win this race. Liberal Jones would be bad." Of course, it's been interesting to watch the two different directions that the president and his own party have gone. Initially, while he did echo fellow Republicans, since then, many of them, including Senator Tim Scott, Senator Lindsey Graham, have said that the best thing for Roy Moore to do would be to drop out, not only for the party, but for the country. The president, Anna, obviously going in a very different direction, again, leaving the door open to even potentially campaign on behalf of Roy Moore. And
I wonder when that would be, because we know he's returning to the White House with Congress facing a very busy week and month ahead, right?
Yeah, that's right. You think it'd be a crucial time for unity within the Republican Party. We may see a vote in the Senate on tax reform as early as Thursday. The president is actually set to meet with congressional Senate Republicans on Tuesday. He's heading to Capitol Hill for the third time in a little bit over a month. And then later that day, he's set up a meeting at the White House with not only Republican leaders in Congress, but also Democrats, because as you recall, in September, they gathered together and came up with this 3-month stopgap for government funding and to raise the debt ceiling. And now they're visiting that once more. As you know, Anna, the government is set to run out of funding by December 8th. So this is really a crucial time for Congress, especially when you consider that legislative victories for this administration over the past year have been lacking. There's a lot riding on tax reform right now, Anna.
All right, Boris Sanchez in Washington, thank you. I want to talk more about today's stunning developments concerning these high-level politicians now embroiled in scandal. Joining us now, Lynn Sweet, Washington bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times, David Gergen, CNN senior political analyst and former presidential advisor to Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton, and Michael D'Antonio, the author of The Truth About Trump. David, we have Conyers now stepping down as ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. We have Franken expressing remorse, vowing to regain the trust of his constituents as he returns to work tomorrow. Do you think this is the end of the story?
Oh, no. The question is whether they're on the right track on the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party. But I think, Anna, we're likely to have more names come forward, other accusations come forward, and difficult decisions by the leadership. But I must say on this, after a period of stumbling so often, the Democrats, I think, are getting it right on sexual harassment. If you look at a Quinnipiac Washington Post poll of only a couple of weeks ago, what it found was if someone is accused of sexual harassment by multiple women, only 40% of Republicans would say that's not a deal breaker. They'd still be willing to vote for him. But 60% of independents say that's a deal breaker, and 80% of Democrats. You know, this is an issue on which doing the right thing is good politics.
Lynn, Conyers is stepping down from a committee, but he isn't losing his job, and it sounds like Franken isn't planning to go anywhere. So Pelosi's statement this afternoon following her controversial comments this morning that Kayleigh mentioned, it reads, "Zero tolerance means consequences." Is this what zero tolerance looks like?
It depends on what the ethics committees do. The ethics committees in the House and Senate are basically toothless tigers in many instances. Maybe this will be different this time, and they also take a very long time in getting any resolution on anything. So speed is also important in this case. So Conyers stepping down from judiciary is an inside game. He might lose some staffers, a little bit of pay. I don't think that's hardly a consequence of substance to pay in this case. But also, one of the things Pelosi said is to let the due process play out. You see a very difference in how Conyers and Franken is approaching this. Franken wants to talk about it. He says, I am going to try and, well, he said what he said. He's giving interviews. Conyers is not. So all these allegations are not the same. And as you see, there are many ways of handling this. And obviously, what Roy Moore is accused of is very, very different.
And it's kind of interesting, though, Lynn, because you talk about due process. That comment specifically about due process needs to take place, that sounds an awful lot like what we're hearing from those supporters of Roy Moore.
Well, I think what is happening with Roy Moore is that that's kind of a little bit of saying due process, let's have an election, and if I'm a Republican, I'm going to vote Republican. That's what this sounds like to me. In a political analysis, all this is just to keep him in the game long enough to remain viable in the eyes of his supporters. I'm not talking about detractors, so they could feel okay about going and voting for him. That's what, in my analysis, I think what that's about.
And as we look at this issue facing both parties with these specific examples, let's talk about how the president is handling all of this, tweeting today, twice at least, on the Alabama Senate race. Just this morning, he writes, "I endorsed Luther Strange in the Alabama primary. He shot way up in the polls, but it wasn't enough. Can't let Schumer Pelosi win this race. Liberal Jones would be bad." That's just one of the two tweets. Michael, the president is not using Moore's name in his tweets today, but isn't he basically saying vote for Moore?
Well, of course he is, and he's begging the people of Alabama to give him a Republican senator. I think what's also fascinating to note in this instance is that the president has said repeatedly, well, Moore denies it. And for as long as he denies it, the president's not going to take this in the way that the rest of us do. And of course, that's what the president himself did when he was running back in 2016. He denied it and denied it and denied it, and he got away with it. So there is this thing that he does that he's voiced often, where you deny everything and move on, and only a weak person, in his estimation, accepts accountability and takes responsibility. So what the Democrats are doing a little bit, and I agree that they're not doing it in a serious way yet, is they're at least acknowledging these cases and acknowledging the seriousness of it and taking them seriously as individuals. So you have Franken talking openly about it and Conyers stepping down from his chairmanship. There's much more to come. And as David said, I think there are many, many more cases to come, because this is about how men often act. And I don't know a woman who hasn't had this kind of thing happen to her, so we should expect a great many more accusations.
I mean, it does seem, David, like the punishment at this point facing these members, these sitting members of Congress right now, is rather punitive. You've got President Trump, meantime, the leader of the Republican Party, supporting a candidate accused of molesting a young teenager decades ago. And you've got House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi calling Conyers an icon after his own harassment allegations. I mean, where is the moral fiber of both parties right now?
Well, I just respectfully disagree that they both look alike as parties in handling this. But, you know, if someone is accused of wrongdoing, the investigation ought to take place before we all decide which way it is. And the Democrats at least are saying we are going to investigate. Now, Lynn Sweet's got a very good point that these investigations have often been toothless, but now now that the focus is on them, they're going to have to be serious about the Conyers investigation. They're going to have to be serious about the Franken investigation and any other people who are accused. And the Democrats are pushing, I think rightfully, a bill in the House to not only have, and Ryan is for this on the Republican side, to have better training for people, including members of Congress, but also to, if there are any settlements, to make them transparent. And when taxpayer money is used, we ought to know about that, not have these kind of hidden deals. At least the Democrats are trying to clean it up. If you contrast that with the leadership of the Republican Party, yes, McConnell, and yes, many other people in the Senate, but Donald Trump, as leader of the party, is refusing to have any investigation on any of the women. He said he was going to bring a lawsuit against these women. Yeah. He has not done that. There's been no investigatory work. And on Moore, he's completely accepted it with no investigatory work.
Let's listen to what Senator Lindsey Graham said, responding to the latest Trump tweets on the Alabama Senate race.
From a Republican point